So welcome everyone to this episode of On Emergence, a podcast on what it takes to be a human being. I'm Laura Sagen, your host. Today, I'm excited to have here with me Daniel Cortez, who is a non-duality teacher, a non-duality educator, and a hunter, something that we're going to get into a little bit later down the episode. So, Daniel, would you like to take over and do a proper introduction?
Well, I think you did a good job. Really, all I do is I walk the path of hunting my own highest self, and I give it away. So I am a person who believes that in yoga, the original meaning of the word yoga, which is union with the divine, I am a believer that this is what this reality is, at least from a certain point of view. The way in which we can describe the mechanics of that process comes through certain people, and then they share it. And people say, teacher, I prefer, really all I am doing is sharing. I like mentor. Because it's like in the medicine, the pediatrician of the United States and Mexico, which I was trained in, the people usually who share the medicine are called tíos. Tío in Spanish means uncle. Mm-hmm. And I like that.
It's a lot more friendly.
And if you are in that position, you are just maybe in the position of an uncle. You are just sharing, not more than that.
I like the word uncle, actually.
Yeah.
It would be an interesting way to introduce you. Like, it's Uncle Daniel.
Yeah, and that's how they do it.
Really?
Yeah, because,
okay.
They're referred to as tíos. They're referred to as like this guy who is carrying, this particular medicine tradition, but he is just referred to as a tío. He's just referred to as an uncle. He's not referred to as the master of blah, 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 blah. Even in the traditions which lead to enlightenment, the yogic traditions, the Eastern traditions, which have a formalized understanding of enlightenment and union with God, even then, there is this kind of if a person, the closer you get to that level, the funnier and more absurd it is that you could ever be a master of anything.
That's true. The little glimpse of understanding of yoga that I have, it's like the more you know, the more you realize how little you know and how ignorant you are.
Well, there is that, but it is even much greater than that, which is that you realize that you're looking at yourself. So how can you be the master if you're looking at yourself? Who can you be master over? You can't. It doesn't exist. So the great irony of the game of consciousness that we experience is that the people who are at the highest levels realize that they can't be higher than anybody else. It doesn't exist. It cannot be done. So the only thing that exists, and with respect to higher and lower, is what we experience at a given moment in space-time, right? So someone has the experience of being closer to the truth, let's say, closer to that union with God than someone else. But in the ultimate sense, everyone is only one being. The closer to the truth that one gets in an embodied sense, the more humble they get. But not because, again, they are not humble as some kind of virtue that everybody else doesn't have. Mm-hmm. Everybody else has it too, but it hasn't been fully made conscious yet. So ultimately, the farther you walk on the path, the more absurd and in a silly and a funny way it gets, right? Because you're only ever looking at yourself, and this is the path, at least as far as I've experienced it.
We kind of started from the deepest end or the first step. Let's start with my favorite word that you used, non-duality. Anything you feel like sharing in relation to this word?
So I came the kind of the traditional shamanic route. I experienced a very long bout of chronic illness, somewhere around 15 years formally, and which went through various permutations, right? Various expressions of what chronic illness is. And then I went to Peru and I bought a one-way ticket to Peru, to the jungle, and I was either going to heal myself or I would not come back, right? I would just heal myself or I would die trying, right? And so I did heal myself through various plant medicines. And then I received a calling in a vision, in a ceremony type of vision. It was not specific to one plant. It was a archetypal vision of archetypal shamanic vision about the underworld, about helping people across. to the other side. That's an image that's found in many, it's been around a very, very long time. It's found in many, many cultures. To make a long story short, is that I ended up formally beginning in a tradition that evolved in the United States and Mexico called the half moon, which is a peyote medicine tradition. And then that tradition eventually traveled to South America, where it combined with the San Pedro cactus, which is very similar to peyote, although different.
That's mescaline, right?
Mescaline is the dominant alkaloid in it, yeah. Mm-hmm. And they both are, peyote and San Pedro. And I was trained in kind of a variant, because actually in the half moon, there are many different tribes that hold half moon, what they call fireplaces. So it's literally a fireplace in a teepee, which is the traditional dwelling of a lot of Plains Indians of the United States. And through that, and a tremendous amount of other experiments with many other plant medicines and other disciplines, including a lot of sitting meditation disciplines from the East. In addition to all of that, I saw a path that would come through me of yoga. I saw that ceremony, if it was combined with a deep understanding of nutritional principles that were common to many non-duality traditions around the world, as well as meditation practices, as well as modern science, if you could combine all of it into one, what you'd have is a path to union with God in the Western world. That's what's come through me so far in this life. So I know the way, and that's the way I walk until I'm no longer a person. And I teach people to go that way, because that's the only thing that I know in quotation marks, because that word "know" is funny. I know of many other traditions and techniques, and they make sense within my worldview. But the path of union with God that I am aware of, that I am able to share, it's a union of science, of Western science, particularly meta science. So meta meaning Greek, in Greek means above. And so a lot of the stuff that's come out only in the last few decades of cognitive science in particular are finally able to shed light on what mystical traditions have been telling us for the last few thousand years. And that, combined with actual techniques from many different traditions, is what I share with people.
Because you're also a physical practitioner, right? Or there's some sort of physical exercise and the body movement that is something that you did in the past, if I'm...
There's many that I still do, and there's many that I share with people. And I've experimented with many things that I don't do too, because I had to find out what the path was, at least as far as I could see it. So there are things that I've experienced that I don't do, because I just don't think that they're precise enough tools for people. Really.
Can you give any examples? Perhaps some of the examples.
Yes, for example, I used to use ice baths a lot. Don't do them anymore for the most part, unless, like, for example, I was just in the United States and I taught a workshop with ice baths and sauna. Now, if the person that I am teaching, person I'm sharing with, has access to cold water that's, let's call it natural, wild water, right? A lake, a river, etc., then I would never have them use an ice bath for many, many reasons. But because I was at a place that had a really nice sauna and a really nice cold plunge, that was a useful tool for people who are just starting out. We call it contrast therapy, right? Usually with the hot cold, which has been common in Nordic culture and Russian and Slavic culture. Yeah, exactly. So, and the wilder the water, like, so if you can go from a sauna into like a lake, it's just for many reasons, it's a big difference between going in from a sauna to an ice bath. So I started out with just doing ice baths, a lot of ice baths, right? And being focused on just the single variable of cold. It's very simplistic.
What is it in the contrast that is involved that is useful? Particularly with someone who is curious about the non-duality and embodying that. Well, I think that's something that you mentioned that really struck a chord when we first met, is that you are your nervous system, you are the nervous system, and there it requires a degree of strength within it to enable you to ask the difficult questions. Because of course, when you ask yourself difficult questions, who am I, what am I here for, you might stumble upon something that is deeply uncomfortable. And if you're not trained to feel that, then that path is going to become longer or more difficult or more painful.
Well, I mean, put simply, enlightenment, or let's call it spiritual true awakening, is a balancing of the nervous system. It's a balancing of you. And the way in which that balancing occurs, that is the science of yoga. So the way in which to accomplish that is the science of yoga, period, the end. So you have to balance the left and the right hemisphere of your brain with the heart, with your organ systems, with the rest of your body, with the feet on the ground, in the earth. That's what you have to do. If you can do that, that leads to a complete acceptance of all existence, which is what we could call love, the acceptance of what is. In order to do that, you cannot just wish that you could do that. You have to train to do it. Some people come to some kind of enlightenment, let's say, without so much training. It's kind of a spontaneous thing. And usually, Eastern traditions, I imagine, would explain this via multiple lives, right? That in this body, right, this kind of enlightenment occurred without the serious training, etc. But what came through me was the serious training part. It came through me to understand the mechanics of it in a certain way, and at least so far, perhaps other things will come through. I'm not that old in this body, so other things will happen. But for now, the sharing of how to do what I just said, which is balance the nervous system in order to be able to see through the game. Because what we experience right now is a layer, nothing else. It's a layer of reality. It's not real, because this is another duality. This is another problem that we have in our dualistic worldview, which is we're going to separate things very quickly into real and not real. So this is why when people have psychedelic experiences and they don't have any kind of framework for them, and they come from a dualistic world, they often say that was more real than the world that they're in. But the trick of the thing is that it's really all just one world, and they're all just different aspects of one reality. And in order to know that in a deep experiential sense, which is the only thing that matters, our ideas about what is and our hypotheses about what is are not worth much, because your sense of well-being, your sense of peace, all things that you deeply find meaningful and enjoyable, they are only going to happen through direct experience. They aren't going to happen through hypothesis, right? So you can have...
We can't think our way through enlightenment. We can't think our way through life. We have to
it's never going to
live through it.
Never going to happen.
I guess for a lot of people, it's a very scary endeavor to actually be alive, live their life.
It is a wise decision to start to conceptualize yourself as the interaction between this body and this environment. So what you perceive to be the body, including your head, including your brain, and what you can perceive to be outside. So for most of us, as you correctly said, we find life to be very scary. Why? You have a serious mismatch between what you think of as this body and this environment. And that is what creates fear. Bringing this body back into balance with what you perceive to be the outside world is what eliminates fear. So, and also eventually leads to true enlightenment.
I guess that's where your work comes in, because I think to bring this into the balance of who you are with the outside world, you kind of need to understand that you're not separate. And I think we're raised with this idea that we are separate. We're individuals, especially in the Western civilizations. Like, you are an individual. You have to be better than others. You have to achieve. You have to complete. You have to be productive. It's almost like perceiving yourself as part of nature, as part of this ecosystem. It's very hard for human brain.
It's not hard for the human brain. It's hard for industrialized people.
Could you expand more on that?
The industrialized world, the path of yoga from the perspective of the industrialized world, which, by the way, yoga was invented not by the industrialized world. Yoga began as consciously, right? The realization in human consciousness that yoga was what was happening, because yoga is always happening. Yoga is the only thing.
Yes.
But the question is, in the particular person, at what level are they conscious of it? Is the only thing. If you find someone who has no clue what the word yoga means, which is most of us, right? Most of us don't know what it means. We have heard the word in the Western world, but we don't have any good reasonable definition of what it means.
We tend to identify it with what is part of yoga, asana, which is the physical exercise.
Right.
But yoga is coming from the word yog, union. And I'm explaining to our audience as well. So those who tend to think about yoga as I'm going to go do yoga now. Oh, from 5 to 6, I'm going to have my yoga. I was like, okay.
Yes, and so this right there, what you have perfectly explained, is the nature of our delusion, is a window into the nature of our suffering and our delusion, because our suffering comes from our delusion. There is really only love in delusion. I'm not the first person to ever say this, but it is very clear to me that this is the case. Love is the acceptance of what is, not I love you because you're my girlfriend or my wife or you're my daughter or whatever.
That's conditional. That's not love.
Yes. And it might be getting closer to the thing called love than other things that we do, but it isn't love. So this is what you are describing as a good window. We have separated, our brain is in a left hemisphere of the brain dominated mode right now. Our nervous system is experiencing a left hemisphere of the brain dominated mode.
Why do you think it's happening?
Because it's a game. Because you are basically the divine looking at itself and playing a game. So this is the traditional religious Indian, meaning Hindu explanation that this is a play, lila. This is like a play, like a drama play. Our traditions, our religions, our culture is evolutionary in nature. It comes from the one God, from the source of existence. That source of existence is the ground of being, not my phrase. I think Paul Tillich, the theologian, said that. What emanates from that is all of existence as we know it. You can go back to the ground of being and become one with the creator of existence, right? The source of existence, let's call it. But now let's go back to the asana thing. If we leave aside the religious, the mythological explanation that this is a game that God plays with itself, and we just stick to the mechanics of the thing. When we are experiencing suffering, we are in this left hemisphere dominated view of the world. This view of the world breaks everything up into tiny little pieces, tiny little categories. So as a result, we can see this very easily in our scientific endeavors. Everything is very siloed. There's a biology, there's chemistry, there's anatomy, and then nothing ever gets put together. Some scientific theories become meta theories, meaning above. So cognitive science, evolutionary biology, etc., they are not afraid to put many disciplines together and say, wait, what's a bigger view from? And so they get closer to the truth. They are better maps than the ones that are just little siloed ones. Okay, so asana, the movements, are like that. If you take this one thing which leads to wholeness, and you don't understand that one thing very well because you are in the left hemisphere dominated view of the world and you need the right hemisphere for the wholeness and perspective, you break everything up into little categories. And now, of course, we live in a hilarious society in which people just go and they think they're doing yoga and they wear tight pants and put it on Instagram or whatever they do. And they go, as you say, for an hour. We are having the experience of being the divine, but completely having forgotten it and getting as lost as we can get. And that results in a society that's dominated by the left hemisphere of the brain. So in each individual, in order to end their own suffering, they follow this path back to oneness, back to union with the divine. And they can see that it's all a joke, that it's not serious. It's sincere in the sense that there are rules, just like a game, like a sport. And if you learn those rules and you respect the rules and you play to win, then you win.
Can you give examples of some of those?
Sure. There's many. Let's use an example of a rule that it wouldn't seem to be part of what I'm talking about, but is obvious to all of us, which is gravity. So you are currently experiencing the world in which if I ask the average person, and myself included, I cannot give you a great definition of gravity. Off the top of my head, I can't give you a good definition of gravity, but I understand that if I step off the building, it's over, right? Okay, so we all understand these kinds of things. The more that the body gets into balance with, again, that outside, what we perceive to be outside of the body, the less we delude ourselves, right? So the more we accept at the beginning this very hard physical reality, And by accepting the hard physical reality, we start to accept many more things which are not obvious, maybe to yourself or your viewers. They have to be lived to really get it. But I give you an example. We are extremely delusional about our food, extraordinarily delusional about our food. People have all kinds of opinions about what kind of food that you could eat. They mean well, but they are just experiencing delusion. If you go outside and the electricity gets shut off, you're going to find out real quick what food is to you. But right now, you don't have that experience, right? And so we are always like that. We are having the experience of thinking like we have a really good beat on things, but we don't mostly have any idea what's going on consciously. So the basic example of food, for example. So you are here talking to me in Peru. We are drinking coca tea, which is the plant that you could make cocaine from, which is a plant that has been demonized all over the world. Of course, its function, when used correctly in a non-delusional manner, is completely different than cocaine. But we live in the world where we don't have any understanding of what that is and how to use it correctly. But it's a tool that can be used for your healing. Or you could chemically extract it and make a thing that enhances your suffering. The way that we relate to plants and animals is one manifestation, right, of our delusion, and there are rules that govern this. And all maps that lead to healing, depending on where these maps evolved in the world, they've always explained deep truths about how to eat, right? How to use plants as medicine. We live in a world where that doesn't exist. We're literally confused about what food is in the modern industrialized world. We eat processed poison. We have no idea how to use plants as medicine, even though they are the only medicine that healthy people, which is to say pre-industrialized people, ever used and ever had access to. We don't eat the very food that has nourished healthy people. So that's a good example of the rules of that game. Like, if you don't eat human being food, which is mostly animals, fruit, and honey, that's mostly human being food. There are some exceptions. If you get into eating grains and beans, which we've been eating for a few thousand years, you have to heavily process them, which we don't do anymore, right? And if you don't do those things lead to a mismatch between this body and that environment, and that's what creates delusion. And that's what we experience.
I guess my next question is around the maps, because it constitutes a big part of your work. If you can share a little bit more about how does an average person who is living and encountering the world of delusion without maybe even realizing it can start navigating towards a more balanced way of living, and what is actually an unbalanced way of living as well? What is it that they need to look at more closely? Any signals that they need to look out for?
So the first thing I want to reiterate, though, is that when I say delusion, I am not talking about an individual person being delusional and everybody else being okay. What I'm saying is that there's only delusion and love. So until we are one with the divine, we are living delusion. I am also living delusion some of the time. Not much of the time, but some of the time. Which means only that I am not in that state of realizing that everyone else I'm looking at is me. The level of analysis that we are normally accustomed to is only from the perspective of what we think of as ego. Only from the perspective of there is I and there is other, and I am stuck in many layers of identity, of being an American or a person from England or a man or a woman, or I like this kind of food. There's many, many layers of identity that we are living that are simply masks. I am saying there is delusion and love, and all of us experience the delusion on the way to union with the divine, which is the complete acceptance of what is, which is love. That's what I'm saying, which is quite different than the way we normally use that word and we experience it, because we are normally hearing, oh, you are delusional.
Because my reality is the truth.
Yes, that's not what I mean. There is an evolutionary reality that is run just like football or baseball or whatever sport you like, boxing, whatever you've experienced. There are rules to it. And that's what all of these traditions which lead to oneness have practices which govern them, which at the highest levels people are quite strict about. For example, if you go to sit with ayahuasca for real in the jungle, and then you diet plants, which means that you drink a mixture of a plant and water, you have a very specific diet, and you cannot stray from it, right? In Ayurveda, for example, the system of medicine which evolved alongside of Vedic thought a few thousand years ago in India, there are specific ideas and practices which are aimed at getting you to wholeness through certain types of breathing, certain types of treatment, and certain types of food and liquid intake. There are techniques which help you go on the path to oneness, to non-duality, which help you to shed the delusion that we all experience, not delusion about that only people in a specific culture experience. It's the experience of separation from the divine itself. That is what I'm calling delusion. Okay. So there is a trait of psychology called openness to experience. Experiences with plant medicines are going to cause openness to increase. So what we experience where we currently are is a lot of openness. This openness leads to much deeper understanding. You cannot get to deep levels of understanding without tremendous openness. You also need to balance it with many other aspects of yourself.
Like what?
Well, I mean,
I'm a very example-driven person. I want examples.
Well, discipline above all. So openness is fine. It's necessary. It is mandatory. So in order to round out, the path of union with the divine is a circular path in the sense that the circle is the thing that you are aiming towards, the wholeness of existence, because divine is everything. So all of the aspects of yourself in this human form are developed on the path to that. Carl Jung called this individuation, the development of the true individual before the individual disappears and becomes one with the divine. So openness is just one aspect of yourself. But in the Western world, you will find pockets. The Sacred Valley of Peru, which is where we currently happen to be sitting, is just one pocket. There are many of them where people are, you could say that people are having the experience of searching. And they search, and then they use tools which are magnifiers of consciousness, the power, the sacred power plants of San Pedro and peyote and ayahuasca and huilca and the mushrooms. There are many. That magnifies consciousness. That creates a lot of opening. And because we come from this problem, this world, which has the mismatch between the body and the environment, the plant experience is usually experienced without a lot of discipline, without much of any discipline. It's not placed within a tradition and within practices which lead to the oneness. So then what you get is communities of lots of openness. You will have people who have had some direct experience, brief experience, not prolonged experience, because to have prolonged experience of oneness and to see through the veil that you're experiencing right now regularly requires discipline and training. So what you get here or in places like this is a lot more openness, and this has a lot of beneficial qualities for people who are on the path of seeking, but usually it comes without discipline.
When you say discipline, I guess what springs to mind to me is sitting meditation, is your nutrition, what you eat, and your physical exercise, some sort of physical practices that would help you strengthen yourself through strengthening your nervous system. Mm-hmm. Is that the discipline that you're referring to?
I'm referring to a trait. You can use those practices to begin to embody the discipline. But discipline is just a thing which already exists within you, which you must go the way of yoga to ultimately fully integrate. So in other words, the true way of yoga is exactly like the hunter, the archer.
Arjuna.
Yes, so the archer is shooting at a target, right? The trouble that most people have in the world is they have no idea where to shoot. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know where to shoot, you can have the best bow and arrow. It's pretty much meaningless because you don't know what you're shooting at, right? Mm-hmm. So you see that this is a function. Does the man who lives in the forest or the jungle, who is a hunter with a bow, does he have any doubts about what he is supposed to do? No, he has no doubt. He is very clear about what he is supposed to do at all times. He is very clear about what he is supposed to hunt. He is extremely clear about what he is supposed to aim at and what he is supposed to do. And his life is very simple.
And it's in dedication to that. Then the life becomes in dedication to that.
The life is dedication to hunting the best thing you can and sharing it with the tribe. And of course, this is what yoga is. You are hunting your highest self and you are sharing with everybody else. And if you are that kind of person who knows that and knows it very, very well, then what will happen is that you will win the game and you will share it with everybody else. So you will figure out the ways in which to remind everybody what they are aiming at and how to shoot and how to do everything else that is involved in the game. So that is what reality is from my perspective.
We're all bound to become bodhisattvas, essentially.
Yes.
It's not even that the suffering doesn't matter. I think it goes back to what Viktor Frankl has written about. If you give a man strong will, he can endure almost anyhow.
Yes.
And I think that that's what you're referring to in terms of like your discipline is what you're contributes, how you're contributing to the wider society, how you are, how do you, like in layman terms is like, how do you make the world better? But you're making the world better by reminding people who they are and then reminding of that, the oneness that we all are. If that discipline and that vision is strong, then everything that you do will be in alignment to that.
What Viktor Frankl, through his own suffering, experienced, and what other people have understood about this idea of why is true, or at least it's getting closer to the truth. And when you get closer and closer to the truth, the more clear you can see that what is really happening is that the divine is hunting its highest self and giving it away, right? That if you do that, that's the way to go home. If you experience the sense of having a purpose, having a why, you'll experience a much more meaningful life than if you struggle with the why, right? I could see it from the hunting perspective. But there are other ways to see it too. It's just that they're going to end in the same place that I'm talking about, right? So ultimately, it is the aiming. We can even get rid of the word hunting, the aiming for your highest self and giving it away. Yoga is the journey of the self, through the self, to the self, this approach. And my belief is that we need as many approaches that lead to the truth as possible, which actually are of service to people. And if something like that comes through you and you can give it, then you should give it. The way of Kriya Yoga, from my perspective, is the highest that I can, that I've experienced. It is true that you aren't the mind and you aren't the body. This is all true. But to go through the true deep acceptance of the body and to eliminate this line that we have here, which is separating what we think of as mind and what we think of as body, and make them one, that is a tremendously powerful way. And it is also the way that I think that much of the Western world will need to go. As the mismatch gets deeper and deeper between this body and this environment, people suffer at a younger and younger age with all kinds of chronic illness. Now, you can try to go through direct inquiry, but then the problem is that the nature of your capacity to understand, which means, by the way, to stand under, right? So that's why we are so intellectual in our society. We're stuck in our heads. We stand under, and it came from the German word unterstand, which means to stand within. So you see that a while back, that understanding meant something totally different. It meant to understand by experience. Now it does not mean to understand by experience. It means just to understand propositionally, the idea. The problem is that you don't heal like that. You cannot heal by propositional understanding, by theory. Can't do it. So, but your notion, living in the world of understanding, living from the neck up, is a physical phenomenon. And that is, of course, why the yogic asanas and all of these things and pranayama, breathing practices, all of these things evolved because a few thousand years ago, people were already beginning to suffer all of these things. The Kriya Yoga of the West, it's not superior to the Kriya Yoga of the East, but the West needs Kriya Yoga of its own.
Why do you think it happened that we got so disconnected from how come it came about that our left hemisphere became so dominant, and how do we engage our right hemisphere? I think it's going back a little bit earlier in our conversation, but I think that this question, what happened?
Well, there are two layers that I can understand that the answer could be given on. Two levels. In our society, we don't have religions of non-duality. It's only the mystical versions of Christianity and Judaism and Islam which have produced enlightened people in our time, right? And maybe some other people who didn't directly belong to those, but drew inspiration or understood themselves through understanding those. But the Western world is a dualistic world. From the Middle East west, right, are only basically dualistic worldviews, except for the very few mystics. There are paths of oneness through those religions, but they are not the regular paths, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so before I ever heard really about the concept, I was poorly educated about Hinduism. So it was what I experienced through the non-duality training of the medicine of the San Pedro cactus and the peyote and other things. So at the level of myth, at the level of religious explanation, that's what I would say. That this is a game in which we can understand in words that we are the divine experiencing itself in human form, playing a game through getting lost, which we do by going from the balance of the nervous system to the left hemisphere dominated version of the nervous system, and then back to balance. Now, mechanically, again, because if someone is listening to this and they say, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but I don't know what you're talking about, and I happen to be a Jewish person or a Christian person or something else like this, or I don't relate to any formal religion at this current time, so your religious, the explanation at the level of religion, is not that useful to me. I say, okay, but there is a mechanical one that I can give you, and you can try it for yourself if you have the guts to do it. If you accept, more or less, you accept the basic scientific story of the Western world, which is to say, human beings have existed for 300,000 to 400,000 years as Homo sapiens. Before that, they were Homo erectus, and they existed for about 1.2 million years. And all of that time, from Homo erectus all the way to now, up until 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, depending on where in the world, up until from the 1.2, give or take, million years to 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, human beings were hunters. And either they were hunters only, pretty much, or they were hunter-gatherers, right? So they gathered plants and berries, etc., right? And dug tubers. And this is very clear based on modern evidence, because there are still hunter-gatherers who live. So we can not only see from the fossil evidence, if you're a very rationalist and materialist person, you're listening to this in a certain part of your mind, because we all are if you come from the West. On a certain level, you are at least a little bit. Most of us come from a very heavily rationalist, materialist perspective. Okay, well, that world doesn't exist anymore for almost all of us, but we can observe, even in modern people, what their lives are like, and they're healthy and free of chronic disease, and we aren't. Okay, that world is a world where each man and each woman knows the whole culture, right? They have to be able to do all of the things, and now we're in a specialized culture. And to go from the hunting type of culture to the super specialized modern culture through agriculture, right, involves a narrowing of the visual field, which results in a left hemisphere dominant view of the world. Once you start to narrow your vision, the left hemisphere of the brain takes over. You do that for a long time, you're going to be super delusional. So, boom. That's how it happens.
I think it's landed with me as well. I certainly have felt a lot happier the more generalized I became. The happier I became.
Yeah.
That rather than doing that one thing.
And what is the beginning of the one thing? Agriculture. As soon as you start to go from the hunting culture, which is a culture that's always moving, that always is constantly in the present moment, because if you are a hunter, then you know by experience that you have to know what's on the ground. You got to know what's above you. You got to know what's out to your left, and you got to know what's out to your right. And if you're hunting with other people or dogs, you got to know where they all are and what they're doing. And if you're in a place which human beings lived in for all of human history until recently, where another human being or another animal could hunt you, you've got to be aware of that. And of course, you always know what you're supposed to be hunting. So when human beings engage in that type of environment, which they cannot do any longer, there is no delusion. Yoga is simply a remembering of that pattern, but consciously. If you remember that pattern and you can figure it all out, and you can do that pattern again consciously, then you can become one with the divine. If you cannot, then you cannot.
The hunter-gatherer analogy was really helpful.
The hunter-gatherer analogy is a view of the pattern of the universe. The universe is only one pattern, and it is hidden to most of us. It is one pattern of energy. If you can return to that being one with that pattern of energy again, then you win.
Then you have to bring it back to others.
That's right. That's the whole game.
I think the agricultural aspect of our existence, I think it emanated from wanting to be safe. Because if you know where your food is coming from, then you'll be safe. You don't have to hunt. You don't have to expose yourself to dangers. And I think there's a drive of human beings towards wanting to feel safe. Or do you think it's a recent development?
No, it's not that. The more you accept yourself as the predator, the safer you feel. I'm always safe. Now, it doesn't mean that no one can shoot me in the head. I don't mean that I'm always safe in the sense they can't die. You see that the predator is not concerned about that. He accepts it. The hunters of our ancestors, and also the modern yogis who become this, it is not that they feel in some kind of egoic sense, oh, no one can hurt me. It is the opposite. They accept that they will die. They love their death, because the closer you get to death, the more you experience the truth. The farther you get from death, the more suffering. So this is why all of these traditions are bringing you back to the present. In the present is the only time and the only way you will ever accept your death. The point of Christianity, the real point of Christianity, was to die before you die. The entire story of that entire story is a shamanic story about dying before you die. It is not, as we take it, literal. You have to go back and die before you die. The only way to do that is yoga. That is the highest form of living, is to die first before you die. Anything else, it's okay, but it's like, it's nothing compared to what you are really capable of.
I think in what you're saying, in a sense that there is a lot of, in terms of accepting your role as a predator, in a way, it's like you're accepting your power, your responsibility. In accepting yourself as a predator, you do accept the responsibility and power and agency of your life, which a lot of people fear.
Yes, and also at the highest level, which is found in the right hemisphere of the brain, you accept that you are the prey. You have to have both. You can't have one without the other. If you start to feel that you are the predator, because this is what happens, is that people tend to get a little bit stronger. They get a little bit stronger when they start to accept that they're the predator. But they're only in the beginning of accepting that they're the predator. They are not at the full acceptance. And the full acceptance of the predator is also the full acceptance of the prey, of being the prey. And that is where sacredness is. Because if you only accept a little bit, you're the predator, right? This is at the level of not treating animals, for example, with deep respect and love, right? This is at the level of killing in a non-sacred way. We in the industrialized world are mostly living at that level, or even more removed, where we are completely denying being the predator at all. This is, of course, where veganism comes from and things like this. This is another manifestation of the savior complex, right? So the farther you get away from death, the more you live out the Christian story of the savior.
Interesting.
And that way is a way of suffering, deep suffering. And it's okay. It's just an aspect of ourselves. It's just part of the path. You're going to start there. If you start in the industrialized world, that's where you're going to be. And the path of yoga is going to take you through all of these aspects of development if you make it very far in this life.
I guess the challenge for me here, and then not, even though I don't currently eat meat, as I say, like I don't like putting myself in boxes. I'm a vegetarian, and that is currently meat, fish and poultry is not on my diet, because you tied it into yogic tradition, I guess meat is seen as tamasic. Then how does that narrative fit?
We are only focusing on words as opposed to understanding that religious concepts and practice, etc., are evolutionary in nature. So, for example, if you examine like the texts that form the foundation of Ayurvedic ideas, right, you will find that they prescribe meat. A few thousand years ago, they were prescribing meat of various types, not just meat, fox meat, all different types for different types of things, right? Shiva, who is one of the highest gods that we can conceptualize, was originally the god of the hunt. So these things evolve over time as you move from the hunting culture. See, in the hunting culture, karma, in my opinion, is not really created because everything is free. You see, when you have the experience of actually hunting, you are engaging in a truly sacred thing, something that is far more sacred than what most people even experience in their level of their use of plant medicines. Far more sacred if you really do it. When you stop the hunting culture, which, as we talked about before, was not because of fear, because when you become a really good hunter for your family, you don't stop, and so this can obviously lead to erasure of different species, right? And then you start to have to use plants, eventually seed plants and stuff for agriculture. When you are one with the rest of nature, you are continuous with it. The idea of karma and how you kill a specific animal and the energy that is transmitted with the way you kill it. So all of these religions, including religious traditions in India, have different classifications for how you killed an animal. When you are continuous with nature, there is no separation. You are in the forest and you don't consider yourself to separate from it. Then there is freedom, and freedom is the highest thing maybe you could say we could strive for. It's one of the highest things we can name, is true freedom, which only comes through this yogic practice. But when you start to domesticate animals, live against your own nature, which is something like the hunter-gatherer nature, and you start to domesticate animals and then put them against their nature, right? So instead of letting a pig actually behave like a pig and root and be in service also of the pig's life or the cow's life, you put them in little cages, and it slowly starts to become this unconscious separation. Now these things are my property. These are things and they are my property. The hunter of the forest does not think anything like that. It's not any kind of relationship that resembles modern agriculture and modern animal consumption. So from this comes, in India, a sedentary society, comes very specific ideas and eventually the worshipping of cows, although not by everyone. For example, the Sikh, who have a lot in common with religiously with Hinduism, do not worship cows. And yet most of them also don't eat meat. And when they do, they have very specific rules about the way in which it could be killed. Hindus also have many among them who eat meat, but not cows. So you see that all of these things are very intricate. And then when you go into the plant medicine world and the ayahuasca world, which is the only world left in the Americas where strict dietary restrictions are upheld at all times, they are doing the same thing. They are using different dietary rules and regulations to listen to the plants, which are helping them help their tribe, which is another way of saying hunting highest self, giving it to the tribe, right? So it's another way of describing yoga. But because they don't have the same ideas, they don't have the same religious tradition, they don't have the same ideas about what is, good and bad, etc. They have other ways of conceptualizing what animals you should eat and what you should not eat. And they have other mythologies. So it's all of this is one reality, one evolutionary reality, which you have to understand deeply if you want to share it with others. You don't have to understand it so deeply, though, to achieve union with God in this life. But you do have to find a tradition with discipline, at the very least, and train.
To pick one and stick to it.
Well, I would say start with the conceptualization of what I'm saying, which is, okay, my purpose is to hunt my highest self, to aim for my highest self, whatever you like when you're listening to this, and give it away. And you start by giving it to your immediate family, And then this grows to include the global family. Once you have that conceptualization in mind, then you can start to say, okay, so how do I actually do that? Now that's where the mystical traditions come in. And that's where finding people like myself, it doesn't have to be me, obviously. There are many. Finding people who are saying something like what I'm saying and who you resonate with. And if they're willing to mentor you, guide you, then you go with them. That's it. And the other thing is that you spend as much time as possible in the thing that we call nature. Do those two things. That's just the best bare bones starting advice I can give.
It's a beautiful way to kind of round up our conversation as well, because what I just realized in what you were saying, by finding someone who can guide you, is that you're accepting your own path towards that destination, and knowing that just your destination is to that higher self, and to bring it back is also when you're accepting that someone is also on that path and bringing that back, and that back would be towards you.
When you get to a certain point, you realize that you are going no matter what. You become extremely single-minded about it, but single-minded in a healthy way. You are giving everything away because you have everything. I mean, I have everything. There isn't anything that I need really from anybody else. This is true for all of us, but we have to walk the path back to the truth to realize it. So we are at the level of words, we're a little bit in a paradox, because I am walking in one sense, I could say, I don't care if anybody comes with me, because it's true. And I'm only saying that because my sense of self, my sense of I that remains, is now so individuated. It has become so individual, and it knows where it's going, and it knows the rules of what it operates by, that it knows it will make it. It knows it will succeed. But our sense, which is beyond that, which we get to, a sense of true love, cannot help but give it away. Every person that goes down the path is going to experience a different version of what I'm saying. Because you see, for me, my suffering in this body was greatly shaped by a brain injury. And my shamanic call happened through that. So, and since we are our nervous system, our sense of self, the people who are listening to this, they will not have the same experience as me. They can be guided to me because I know the rules very well. But our own sense of I and other, all of this is our own unique path. There are commonalities, but because most people will never experience the exact brain injury, right, and the exact method of healing that I encountered, they won't see it exactly the same, right? Everyone is the universe compressed into a point of view, and they are looking out at themselves right now, not realizing it. That view is unique to them. But the rules of the game, as I say, the rules of Kriya Yoga, they are common to us all. But just because you follow it doesn't mean that you will have the exact same experience as everybody else. You won't. You have your own experience of being a you, of being an I, which is your own story. And then this will eventually end, and you will let go of all your past and all attachments, etc. And you eventually just completely be one with God. But it's unique to you. So, but the rules, like I say, the rules of a game are still in common. We still have them in common. So that's what enables different yogis or different gurus or shamans, whatever they're called. That's what enables them at higher levels to be able to serve others, is that the rules of the game are still enough in common that we can do that.
I'm looking forward to re-listening to during the editing process and having multiple insights, as I hope people listening or watching will have as well. And I guess the question that I have is then how people can find out more about the work that you do. Where can they find you? Where they can connect with you? Ask questions, perhaps, if you're open to that.
Yes.
And you can also leave it in comments as well.
The easiest way is just to contact me directly if you're interested in training. I basically spend all of my time training. I train other people, and all of my life is my own training. And really, there is no difference to me between the two things either. Right, so,
you train yourself through training others.
Yes, I just train. That's all I do. So I just hunt. That's really all I do. And on Instagram, it's at Maps of Healing. And there is a website, mapsofhealing.org. The main thing is just to contact me probably through the Instagram.
I will also share it in the notes.
Yes, and then from there, if people want to train, then there is a call. We see if that's really what you want to do, and then we train, and we do it. I work right now as either in private, one-on-one, or in groups, and it's a traditional teacher-apprentice relationship. But I really prefer like the tío thing. We started in the beginning of the conversation. Yeah, it's really like uncle-nephew or uncle-niece. That's really all it is. It's not teacher, it's not master this, and it's nothing like that. I have taken what you can find in different environments in ashrams and monasteries and made it into versions, my own versions for the Western world, for the modern Western person, for people who can see me sometimes and people who can't, so that it's online, so that people are supported in a journey of training and discipline to their highest self.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for appearing here on the podcast. And I'm really hopeful that your call out is heard by people that are meant to hear it.
Yeah, thank you.
I was definitely looking forward to it. I was like, ooh, what can I learn from it?
Yeah, you're very lucky. You get to learn a lot of these
things.
Yeah,
I consider myself incredibly lucky because in these conversations, I learn so much from people I encounter. Mm-hmm. It's a really beautiful journey.
Yes, I agree.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.